Alright everyone, it's time for the illustrious part 3 of the anti-propaganda series, how the old media attacks the new with 6 degrees of, insert whatever you wish to relate someone to here. The idea is simply this. The creation of a false continuum in which things that really have no meaning are overlapped between two or more people or things or ideas. In order to relate them in the minds of people that you want not to support any of those same groups. For example, you would say, well, this well-known ethno-nationalist is really pro-gun, so all these other pro-gun people have something in common with them. That's a topical similarity that is also shared with people on the far left side of the spectrum. We see, of course, communist militants around the world are very pro-gun as long as the guns are in their hands. But they're not encouraging you to make that connection now, are they? Now, you can have all sorts of fun with this particular propaganda tactic. Because if you look at any two people in the world, you'll find some similarity between them. For instance, you would group all males together. Well, males are not a homogenized group insofar as anything beyond having a Y chromosome. But that doesn't really matter, of course, and statistics often lie because of the creation of false and misleading categories for people. Along the same lines. For instance, within crime stats, you would have to do a little bit of digging when people post very general crime statistics in order to differentiate between urban and rural zones, in order to differentiate between a pro-gun or an anti-gun state, the demographics, the population density, the replacement rate, the economic situation of different locations is all basically forsaken. It would become too complicated for the average person to actually do this. So you simply omit it. And anybody who wishes to compile such information, unless they have it right on hand, isn't going to be able to refute your very flawed arguments on the topic, whether pro or anti-gun, by the way, because you've created one of these relative situations and you're not looking at all of the actual information. So if you want to relate to people in the minds of your fans, followers, adherents, acolytes, whatever they may be, so that they think that two things are related where they're really not, you have to ignore 99% of their character. For instance, when Right Wing Watch likens me to the extreme right. Well, they're not going to insert anything into that story about my views on gay marriage. They're not going to insert anything about my views on abortion. They're not going to insert anything about my environmental views, certainly. They're not going to insert anything about my actual racial views. They're going to ignore all that because it doesn't follow the narrative that they're seeking to construct. That is, it's a false narrative. But as long as you artificially limit the information, you can play the 6 degrees game with literally anything. Oh, well, Mao Zedong loved water, drank water every day. Oh, crap, so did this other person. Well, you're a little bit like Mao now, aren't you? Now, that's an absurdist example. It wouldn't really follow. But in a lot of people's minds, as long as it's within a general category, it's socio-political or religious or something like that, the connection can be made. Now, it's a false connection. You can make connections between two spiritual paths, two political figures, two social ideologies. There's overlap between libertarians on some issues and people who are national socialists. This does not mean that they're related in any meaningful way. There are relationships that can be drawn between communism and neoliberalism. It doesn't mean that they're related in a meaningful way. Both the left and right, by the way, delve into these things. Antifa has a few topical things in common with some right-wing revolutionary movement. It doesn't mean that there's any actual relation between them. And in doing so, when you play this game, it is almost always used in a negative way. It's almost always a way to take something that's generally agreed upon as negative and overlap it with a group that really has not that much in common with it, or a person, or a figure, an idea, and to draw those parallels between the two in order to affect the minds using propaganda. That's all it is. It's a very simplistic method. It's extremely dishonest. It's usually not meaningfully true. Because, of course, the claim itself can be true. You can say, well, this person, likes guns, and that person likes guns, and, that other person's a total scumbag, and therefore this person, because they have that in common, they must be a scumbag too. There may be no other points of overlap between their political, social, or behavioral views whatsoever. But you've just drawn a comparison that will stick anyway. And if somebody comes forward and says, well, on all these other counts, you're totally wrong and they're totally different, it won't affect the minds of people that have already been propagandized towards, generally speaking, because they typically are going to be part of some echo chamber, some ideology that is painted. It's used other methods as well in tandem with this to paint the other ideology as extreme or dangerous or wrong or something. For instance, people would say, well, these mass shooters use guns. The NRA likes guns, therefore the NRA has something to do with mass shootings. No, it doesn't. It really doesn't. It speaks for law-abiding gun owners. In fact, right now is pushing certain forms of gun control, which is absolutely hilarious to me given their so-called reputation. But there's no further point of overlap. The further ideology is entirely different. The fact that you have a bunch of hunters, sports shooters, and historical arms collectors lumped in with mass shooters is so blatantly dishonest that any sane person will reject the argument. But not if you're doing this well, not if the propaganda actually is able to stick because you're doing a good job of delivering it. So as always, please spread these videos against propaganda around because they are necessary. At this point, there's a huge amount of propaganda circulating online aimed largely against independent content creators by the legacy media, establishment politicians. It's not a left-right issue. Partially it's fiscal. Partially it's about people wanting to cling to power when they realize neoliberalism and neoconservatism, which have been in power for 30 years, are beginning to fall by the wayside because of the collective action of literally hundreds of thousands of independent individuals that can far outmaneuver them, far more efficient, generally more honest, sometimes given over to the same fringe beliefs or clickbait as people in the old guard of politics, but still better, still a vast improvement, and not beholden to a bunch of corporations, banks, and multinational business people. That's about all. Peace out.